In a prestigious courthouse in Cincinnati, where success was measured by the thread count of suits and the shine of leather briefcases, an unexpected confrontation was about to unfold that would leave everyone speechless. Comment where you're watching from today, as we dive into a story about respect, assumptions, and the power of staying true to your roots. The marble halls echoed with whispers and footsteps as attorneys gathered for what seemed like a routine case. Among them stood J.D. Vance, a Yale law graduate whose journey from the hardscrabble hills of Appalachia to the polished corridors of justice was anything but ordinary. Despite his impressive credentials, he carried himself with the unpretentious dignity of someone who hadn't forgotten where he came from. William Moore, a corporate attorney known for his designer suits and condescending attitude, couldn't resist making his opinions known. As the attorneys prepared their arguments, Moore's voice carried across the courtroom with deliberate clarity. "Look what the wind blew in from the holler," he smirked, adjusting his $1,000 cufflinks. "I didn't realize they were letting rednecks argue cases in federal court these days." The courtroom fell silent. Several junior associates shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while the judge's eyebrows raised slightly. J.D. Vance remained perfectly still, his expression unchanged as he organized his documents with methodical precision. Moore, emboldened by the silence, continued his verbal assault. "I mean, really," Moore drawled, addressing his colleagues as if sharing an inside joke. "Some of us spent generations building the prestige of this profession. We can't have just anyone walking in here thinking they belong." His expensive loafers clicked against the floor as he paced, each step emphasizing his perceived superiority. But J.D. Vance had faced far worse challenges than a privileged attorney's disdain. Growing up in a family where resilience wasn't a choice, but a necessity, had taught him that true strength lay in character, not appearances. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. "You know, Mr. Moore," Vance began, his slight Appalachian accent now deliberately pronounced, "where I come from, we judge people by the strength of their arguments, not the label on their suit. But since you're so interested in credentials..." He paused, reaching for a document. "Would you like to compare our case win rates, or perhaps our Yale Law School rankings? I graduated first in my class. Where did you place?" The color drained from Moore's face as murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The judge, Sandra Martinez, leaned forward with newfound interest. "Mr. Moore," she interjected, "I believe I'm familiar with Mr. Vance's work. His recent brief on constitutional law was cited by the Supreme Court. Shall we proceed with the actual case?" Moore's carefully constructed facade of superiority crumbled as he realized his grave miscalculation. The other attorneys in the room, who had moments ago been his assumed allies in mockery, now regarded him with thinly veiled contempt. J.D. Vance, however, showed no sign of satisfaction at his opponent's discomfort. Instead, he delivered his opening arguments with the same quiet dignity he had maintained throughout the exchange. His words carried the weight of someone who understood both the law and life itself, a combination that proved devastating to Moore's case. By the end of the session, it wasn't just Vance's legal expertise that had won the day. It was his unwavering composure in the face of prejudice. As the courtroom began to clear, several young lawyers approached him, eager to learn from someone who had proven that success wasn't about where you came from, but where you chose to go. Later, in a quiet moment, one of the junior associates asked Vance how he had maintained his composure. His response would be remembered long after the case was forgotten. Success isn't about making others feel small to make yourself feel big. It's about rising above while lifting others up. Where I come from, that's just called being a decent human being. Have you ever been underestimated because of where you came from? Share your story in the comments below. Sometimes the best way to prove someone wrong is to show them what real class looks like. The afternoon session was about to begin, and the atmosphere in the courthouse had shifted dramatically since the morning's exchange. Word of J.D. Vance's composed response to William Moore's elitism had spread through the building like wildfire, drawing additional spectators to the proceedings. Legal interns and seasoned attorneys alike filed into the courtroom, eager to witness the continued clash between old money arrogance and hard-earned wisdom. Moore had retreated to the far corner of the courtroom during the recess, huddled with his team of associates who seemed less confident than they had been that morning. Their expensive suits and carefully crafted appearances suddenly felt like hollow armor against Vance's authentic presence. The whispers and sideways glances from their colleagues made it clear that the morning's attempt at public humiliation had backfired spectacularly. J.D. Vance sat quietly at his table, reviewing his notes with the same methodical focus that had carried him from the struggling streets of Middletown, Ohio, to the prestigious halls of Yale Law School. His modest briefcase, worn but well-maintained, stood in stark contrast to Moore's Italian leather attaché case, but it was clear to everyone present which man commanded genuine respect. As Judge Martinez returned to the bench, Moore attempted to reassert his dominance. "Your Honor," he began, his voice carrying a hint of desperate bravado, "before we continue, I'd like to address some concerns about the opposing counsel's unconventional approach to this case." His emphasis on unconventional drew disapproving murmurs from the gallery. Vance remained still, his expression unchanged, as Moore continued his thinly veiled attacks. "We're dealing with sophisticated financial matters here, cases that require a certain pedigree of understanding. Not everyone has the background to grasp the nuances of high-level corporate litigation." Judge Martinez's expression hardened. "Mr. Moore, are you suggesting that counsel's background somehow diminishes his ability to represent his clients effectively? Because from what I've observed, Mr. Vance's grasp of both the law and its practical applications has been nothing short of exemplary." Moore shifted uncomfortably, his expensive suit suddenly feeling too tight around the collar. "Your Honor, I merely suggest that some of us have been groomed for these proceedings from birth. It's about understanding the culture of corporate law, the unwritten rules that govern our profession." That's when J.D. Vance stood, his movement deliberate and measured. "Your Honor, if Mr. Moore is so interested in discussing background and preparation, perhaps we should examine the substance of our arguments rather than the circumstances of our upbringing. Where I come from, results speak louder than resumes." The courtroom fell silent as Vance began methodically dismantling Moore's earlier arguments. He wove together complex legal precedents with practical insights, demonstrating a depth of understanding that transcended mere academic knowledge. His voice, carrying just a hint of his Appalachian roots, commanded attention without demanding it. "You see, Mr. Moore," Vance continued, addressing his opponent directly, "while you were being groomed for this profession, I was learning something, perhaps more valuable. How real people are affected by the decisions made in rooms like this. When you represent clients who've worked their entire lives to build something only to have it threatened by corporate maneuvering, you understand that law isn't just about precedents and procedures, it's about people." Several members of the jury nodded unconsciously, drawn in by Vance's authentic perspective. Even some of Moore's own associates seemed to be reconsidering their allegiances. The power dynamic in the courtroom had shifted so dramatically that Moore's earlier condescension now seemed not just inappropriate, but almost pitiable. A senior partner from another firm, Thomas Clark, who had been observing the proceedings, leaned forward with increased interest. He had seen countless attorneys come and go, but there was something different about Vance. A combination of sharp legal acumen and genuine human understanding that couldn't be taught in any law school. Moore, increasingly desperate to regain control, interrupted with another objection. Your Honor, this emotional appeal has no place in a corporate litigation case. We're here to discuss facts and figures, not personal narratives. Judge Martinez's response was swift and decisive. Mr. Moore, I remind you that the law exists to serve justice, not just process. Mr. Vance's arguments are firmly grounded in legal precedent while demonstrating a clear understanding of their real-world implications. Please proceed, Mr. Vance. As the afternoon wore on, Vance continued to present his case with a clarity and purpose that made Moore's earlier mockery seem increasingly foolish. He cited case law with precision while connecting each point to the human impact of the decision at hand. His performance wasn't just a lesson in legal expertise, it was a masterclass in dignity and professionalism. During a brief recess, a young associate named Jennifer Lee approached Vance. "Sir," she began, hesitantly, "I've been working at Moore's firm for 2 years, and I've never seen anyone handle pressure like that. How do you maintain such composure?" Vance's response reflected the wisdom that had brought him from the challenges of his youth to the heights of his profession. "The hardest trials in life aren't found in courtrooms," he explained. "When you've seen families struggle to put food on the table, when you've watched communities fight to survive against odds that seem insurmountable, that's when you learn what real pressure feels like. This," he gestured around the courtroom, "this is just about remembering who you are and why you're here." The young associate's eyes widened with understanding. She glanced back at Moore, who was berating one of his junior lawyers for a minor oversight, and made a decision about the kind of attorney and person she wanted to become. As the afternoon session resumed, Moore's attempts to reassert his perceived superiority grew increasingly desperate. He emphasized his connections to prestigious firms, his family's long history in law, and his exclusive educational background. But with each attempt, he only highlighted the contrast between his surface-level advantages and Vance's substantive expertise. The gallery had grown larger as word of the morning's exchange spread through the courthouse. Among the spectators was Richard Anderson, a veteran court reporter who had seen thousands of cases over his decades-long career. "In all my years," he whispered to his colleague, "I've never seen someone so thoroughly demonstrate the difference between having authority and earning it." As the trial entered its crucial phase, the tension in the courtroom had evolved from a clash of personalities into something more profound, a battle between two fundamentally different approaches to justice. J.D. Vance's measured composure continued to stand in stark contrast to William Moore's increasingly agitated state. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the high windows of the courthouse, illuminating the dust particles that danced in the air like silent witnesses to the unfolding drama. Moore, his earlier smugness now replaced by barely concealed anxiety, shuffled through his papers with trembling hands. His expensive pen, a status symbol that had earlier been wielded like a weapon, now leaked ink onto his monogrammed shirt cuff. "Your Honor," Moore began, his voice carrying a hint of desperation, "I'd like to present evidence of our firm's historical success in similar cases. Our track record speaks for itself." He gestured to one of his associates, Michael Johnson, who hurried forward with a stack of bound reports. Vance remained still, his expression thoughtful as he watched Moore's theatrical display. The years spent observing his grandmother's quiet strength back in Middletown had taught him more about patience than any law school course ever could. He waited, knowing that sometimes the most powerful response was simply letting others reveal their own weaknesses. Judge Martinez reviewed the presented documents with a critical eye. "Mr. Moore, while your firm's past successes are noted, they seem irrelevant to the specific merits of this case. Perhaps we should focus on the matter at hand." Moore's face flushed red as he pressed on, his voice rising slightly. "But, Your Honor, It's crucial to understand the pedigree behind our arguments. When you consider the combined centuries of corporate law experience in our firm, compared to... He paused, throwing a dismissive glance at Vance. Alternative perspectives. That's when Vance slowly rose from his chair. The room fell silent, every eye fixed on his calm demeanor. Your Honor, if Mr. Moore wishes to discuss experience, perhaps we should examine what kind truly matters in this case. Is it the number of years spent in mahogany-paneled offices, or the understanding of how legal decisions impact real people's lives? He moved to the center of the courtroom, his presence commanding attention without demanding it. While Mr. Moore's firm was accumulating centuries of corporate experience, my clients were building something far more valuable, a community. They created jobs when others were leaving town. They provided hope when others had given up. And now they face the threat of losing everything because some believe that profit margins matter more than people. Sandra Taylor, a veteran court clerk who had seen countless attorneys come and go, found herself nodding unconsciously. In her decades of service, she had rarely witnessed such an authentic voice in these halls of power. Moore, increasingly flustered, interrupted. This is precisely what I mean. This emotional appeal, this hillbilly rhetoric has no place in corporate law. His outburst echoed through the chamber, causing several jurors to flinch. Judge Martinez's gavel came down hard. Mr. Moore, that comment is completely inappropriate and unprofessional. One more outburst like that, and you'll be held in contempt. But Vance raised his hand gently. Your Honor, if I may, Mr. Moore's choice of words doesn't offend me. Where I come from, we learn early that people's words reveal more about themselves than those they're trying to insult. The gallery murmured in appreciation as Vance continued, his voice steady and clear. Yes, I come from the hills. Yes, my accent might not match the polished tones Mr. Moore learned at his prep school. But here's what I also bring to this courtroom. An understanding that behind every legal argument, every corporate maneuver, there are real people whose lives hang in the balance. Robert Harris, one of Moore's senior partners, who had been observing from the back of the courtroom, scribbled a note to his colleague. The firm's reputation was taking a beating, not because of Vance's background, but because of Moore's inability to see past it. Vance proceeded to present a series of witnesses, each telling a compelling story of how the community had been built through hard work and determination. He handled their testimony with a respect and understanding that made Moore's earlier condescension seem even more shallow. Mrs. Margaret Smith, Vance called his next witness, could you tell the court about your family's 3 generations of involvement in this business? An elderly woman took the stand, her dignity matching Vance's own. As she spoke about the company's role in supporting local families through tough times, several jurors wiped tears from their eyes. Moore's attempts to object on grounds of relevance were overruled. As Judge Martinez recognized the crucial connection between community impact and corporate responsibility. During a brief recess, Barbara Williams, a young law student observing the proceedings, approached one of Moore's associates. I always thought corporate law was just about numbers and precedents, she admitted. But watching Mr. Vance, it's like he's teaching everyone in this room that justice isn't just about winning cases. Moore, overhearing this, attempted to reassert his authority. This is exactly the problem with letting outsiders into our profession, he muttered loudly enough to be heard. They turn everything into a social justice crusade. Vance, passing by at that moment, paused briefly. Mr. Moore, he said quietly, the difference between us isn't where we came from. It's that you see law as a way to maintain privilege, while I see it as a tool to ensure justice. Both approaches can win cases, but only one helps us sleep at night. The afternoon proceeded with a detailed examination of financial records. Here, Moore expected to finally gain the upper hand, believing that complex corporate finances would be beyond Vance's grasp. Instead, Vance demonstrated a masterful understanding of both the numbers and their implications, weaving together technical expertise with practical insight. "You see," Vance explained to the jury, breaking down complicated financial concepts into clear, relatable terms, "when you've grown up watching families struggle to balance checkbooks at the kitchen table, you develop a very real understanding of how financial decisions impact lives." Linda Robinson, a juror who had initially been skeptical of Vance's less polished appearance, found herself completely won over by his ability to make complex legal and financial concepts accessible and meaningful. His authenticity served not to diminish his expertise, but to enhance it. As the day drew to a close, Moore made one final attempt to salvage his position. "Your Honor, while Mr. Vance's personal narrative is touching, we must remember that corporate law operates above such emotional considerations. We're here to discuss legal precedents, not social work." Vance's response would be remembered and quoted in the courthouse for years to come. Mr. Moore seems to forget that every legal precedent he cites was born from a real human situation. Every corporate law he defends was written to protect not just profits, but people. When we forget that, we're no longer practicing law. We're just playing an expensive game with other people's lives. The gallery burst into spontaneous applause, quickly silenced by Judge Martinez's gavel, but the impact of Vance's words lingered in the air. Even Moore's own team seemed moved, several of them exchanging glances that suggested they were questioning their own approach to their profession. The final day of proceedings began with an electric atmosphere in the courtroom. News of the previous day's exchanges had spread throughout the legal community, drawing an unprecedented crowd. Among them sat several senior partners from prestigious firms, all eager to witness the conclusion of what had become more than just a corporate case. It had evolved into a watershed moment for the legal profession itself. J.D. Vance arrived, early, as was his habit, taking a moment to thank the courthouse security guard, Joseph Brown, by name. Moore, in contrast, swept in moments before the session began, surrounded by a phalanx of associates carrying stacks of last-minute documents. The contrast between their entrances spoke volumes about their different approaches to not just law, but life itself. Judge Martinez called the court to order, her experienced eyes scanning the packed gallery. "Before we begin final arguments, I remind everyone that this is a court of law, not a theater. Any demonstrations will result in immediate removal." Her gaze lingered meaningfully on the spectators who had witnessed yesterday's spontaneous applause. Moore rose first, straightening his custom-made suit with trembling hands. His usual confidence had been severely shaken, but privilege dies hard. "Your Honor, distinguished members of the jury," he began, his voice carrying a forced authority. "Over the past days, we've been subjected to an unusual and, frankly, unprecedented style of legal argument. While Mr. Vance's colorful approach may be entertaining, we must return to the fundamental principles of corporate law." As Moore launched into a technical dissertation on precedents and procedures, several jurors struggled to maintain their attention. His words, though technically precise, felt hollow and disconnected from the real issues at hand. Even his own associates seemed to be distancing themselves, their body language suggesting growing discomfort with their superior's approach. Sandra Martinez, one of Moore's junior partners, discreetly slipped a note to her colleague. "He still doesn't get it, does he?" The colleague's slight headshake spoke volumes. They had watched their firm's reputation take hit after hit, not because of any legal shortcoming, but because of Moore's inability to see beyond his own prejudices. When it was Vance's turn to present his closing argument, the transformation in the courtroom was palpable. He rose slowly, deliberately, his presence commanding attention without demanding it. "Your Honor," "Members of the jury," he began, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who understood both law and life. "Mr. Moore is right about one thing. This case is about principles, but perhaps not the ones he thinks." Vance moved to the center of the courtroom, his worn leather shoes making no sound on the polished floor. "Throughout these proceedings, we've heard a lot about corporate precedents, about the way things have always been done. But let me ask you this. What good is precedent if it doesn't serve justice? What value is tradition if it destroys the very communities it should protect?" Elizabeth White, a senior juror who had initially seemed skeptical of Vance's less polished appearance, leaned forward, completely engaged. His words weren't just arguments, they were bridges between the abstract world of law and the concrete reality of human experience. "Mr. Moore and his firm represent a view of law that sees it as a tool of privilege," Vance continued, his slight Appalachian accent now carrying a dignity that made Moore's polished tones seem artificial. "They believe that justice is something that can be bought with expensive suits and inherited connections. But where I come from, we understand that true justice doesn't care about your accent or your address." Moore shifted uncomfortably in his chair as Vance systematically addressed each of the technical points raised in Moore's closing, demonstrating not just a thorough understanding of corporate law, but an ability to connect it to fundamental principles of justice. His knowledge wasn't just memorized, it was lived. "When you strip away all the fancy language and expensive trappings," Vance explained, gesturing to the extensive documentation Moore's team had presented, "this case is about a simple question. Do we believe that the law exists to protect the powerful or to ensure justice for all?" Richard Anderson, a veteran legal reporter covering the case, scribbled furiously in his notebook. In 30 years of courtroom coverage, he had never seen someone so effectively bridge the gap between technical expertise and human understanding. Vance continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction, but never losing its measured tone. "Mr. Moore suggested earlier that some of us don't belong in these hallowed halls, that the law is the exclusive domain of those born into privilege. But I submit to you that it's precisely this kind of thinking that endangers our legal system." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "Every person in this courtroom, whether they wear hand-tailored suits or work boots, deserves equal justice under the law. And more importantly, they deserve advocates who understand that law isn't just about winning cases, it's about serving justice." Moore's face had turned an alarming shade of red as he listened to his entire worldview being systematically dismantled. He rose to object, but Judge Martinez's warning glance made him think better of it. His own team seemed to be distancing themselves further, some even nodding unconsciously at Vance's words. Jennifer Clark, a first-year law student observing from the gallery, whispered to her classmate, "This is why I wanted to become a lawyer." Her words carried across the hushed courtroom, earning several understanding nods from those nearby. As Vance moved toward his conclusion, he addressed the fundamental issue that had underlaid the entire proceedings. The law, at its best, is not a weapon to be wielded by the privileged against the vulnerable. It's a shield to protect all of us, and a tool to ensure that justice isn't just a word we write in fancy briefs, but a reality we deliver to every person who walks through these doors. He turned to face the jury directly. "You've heard two very different approaches to the law in this courtroom. One sees it as a means to preserve power and privilege. The other recognizes it as a path to justice. The choice before you isn't just about this specific case. It's about what kind of legal system we want to have." The silence that followed Vance's closing argument was profound. Even the usual shuffling of papers and clearing of throats was absent as his words resonated through the chamber. Judge Martinez, who had seen thousands of arguments in her career, allowed the moment to linger before calling for the jury to begin deliberations. As the court prepared to adjourn, Moore made one final, desperate attempt to salvage his dignity. "Your Honor," he began, his voice strained, "I move to have Mr. Vance's closing argument stricken from the record as inflammatory and prejudicial." Before the judge could respond, Vance turned to his opponent with genuine compassion in his eyes. "Mr. Moore, the greatest prejudice shown in this courtroom hasn't been in any argument I've made. It's been in the assumption that only one type of person can effectively serve justice. The jury's deliberation was surprisingly brief. When they returned, their verdict was not just a decision on the case at hand, it was a referendum on the two approaches to law they had witnessed. Vance's clients prevailed on every count, but the real victory was larger than any single case. As the courtroom cleared, young lawyers and law students crowded around Vance, eager to learn from someone who had demonstrated that one didn't have to choose between being a good lawyer and a good person. Moore slipped out quietly, his expensive briefcase somehow looking less impressive than it had days before. The final words of the day came not from either attorney, but from Judge Martinez herself. As she prepared to leave the bench, she addressed the remaining spectators. "Let this case serve as a reminder that the law's true strength lies not in how it's wielded by the powerful, but in how it protects and serves all people, regardless of their background." In the years that followed, this case would be referenced not just for its legal precedents, but for the larger lesson it taught about justice, dignity, and the true meaning of professional excellence. And in law schools across the country, a new generation of attorneys would learn that some of the best legal minds don't come with privileged pedigrees. They come with an understanding of both law and life. The story of J.D. Vance's courtroom triumph became more than just a tale of legal victory. It became a testament to the power of staying true to one's roots while rising to meet any challenge. In the end, it wasn't just about winning a case. It was about showing that true justice speaks with many accents, but always in the language of truth.